Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're going to the Cape Fear River Basin down in North Carolina. And we're going to be looking at water qualities, specifically this chemical called 1-value-4-dioxane. You know, it's been in the news lately. Our listeners have been asking about it, so we wanted to kind of dig in a little deeper. And our main source today is going to be a recent article from City View. It's a Fayetteville news outlet.
Yeah, and they really focused on a recent event, a discharge of 1-value-4-dioxane from a wastewater treatment plant. And it's got a lot of people concerned.
Yeah, so before we kind of get into the nitty-gritty of that case, let's do a quick explainer, I think, for our listeners who might not be familiar with it. What exactly is 1-value-4-dioxane, and why should people even care if it's in the water?
So 1-value-4-dioxane, it's an industrial chemical. They use in a lot of products, plastics, resins, even some household cleaners. And the problem is it's a likely carcinogen, which means it can cause cancer. It can also be harmful to kidneys and your liver.
Yeah, so not something you want in your drinking water, obviously. And the City View article highlights a specific incident that happened in January of this year. The city of Asheboro, their wastewater treatment plant, released a pretty large amount of 1-value-4-dioxane into the deep river, which flows into the Cape Fear River.
Right, and it was a pretty alarming amount too, like way above what the EPA considers safe. The EPA, they have this health advisory limit for 1-value-4-dioxane in drinking water, and this discharge exceeded that by quite a bit.
So what does that actually mean for people's health? The article mentioned cancer risk, but maybe it would be good to give people a little bit more context around that.
Yeah, so these health advisory limits, the EPA sets them based on the likelihood that long-term exposure could cause problems. And for 1,4-dioxane, they determined that if someone's drinking water has levels above that limit over their lifetime, it increases their risk of developing cancer.
So that's definitely concerning if they're exceeding those limits. And, you know, this article focuses on this one discharge event, but it sounds like this is not just an isolated incident.
Right, this particular discharge event didn't actually impact Fayetteville's drinking water supply because of dilution. You know, as it travels down the river, it gets diluted more and more. However, this is just a part of a bigger picture. 1-value-4-dioxane has been detected in the Cape Fear River Basin for a number of years. Fayetteville's Public Works Commission, or PWC, they've been monitoring and testing for it since 2014.
Oh, wow. Okay, so they've been on top of it for a while. So what does their data tell us? Has it always been this bad, or is this a recent increase?
Well, their data shows generally the levels have been pretty low, but there have been some spikes. Back in November 2024, actually, they recorded the highest level of 1-value-4-dioxane since they started testing. It wasn't as high as this recent Asheboro discharge, but it definitely, you know, raised some eyebrows.
So it's been kind of brewing for a while. It makes you wonder how this was even allowed to happen. Is no one regulating this chemical?
There have been attempts. The North Carolina DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, tried to set limits on it, but there's been this back and forth. Back in September 2024, a judge actually struck down DEQ's attempt to regulate Asheboro's discharge.
Wow, that's interesting. So a judge actually said, no, you can't regulate it. What was the reasoning behind that?
It gets kind of complicated.
Yeah.
But essentially, the judge sided with the city of Asheboro, who argued against the regulations. But DEQ didn't give up. They appealed the ruling. And then things got really interesting. The EPA stepped in and said, you have to control this.
Oh, wow. So now the EPA is involved. What are they doing? Are they like cracking down on Asheboro directly?
They're taking a pretty strong stance. They gave the DEQ 90 days to issue a new permit to Asheboro with stricter limits on the 1-value-4-dioxane discharge. And they're serious about it. If DEQ doesn't comply, the EPA will take over the whole permitting process themselves.
Wow, they're putting the pressure on. So they're saying this isn't just a local Asheboro problem. This is a bigger issue with the whole river basin.
Exactly. And this is part of a bigger picture. The EPA, they've been concerned about 1-value-4-dioxane in North Carolina drinking water in general. They've found that the state has some of the highest levels of this chemical in the entire country.
Oh, wow. So it's not just an isolated thing. It's pretty widespread. What does that mean for the people living in the Cape Fear River Basin? Are they at a greater risk than other people?
Well, the data suggests that, they could be exposed to a lot more 1-value-4-dioxane in their drinking water than the national average, which is, you know, a serious concern.
So we've established this chemical. It's a potential health risk. It's in the water at levels that are concerning. So I think a lot of people will be asking, okay, what can we do about it? Can you just filter it out?
Well, that's the thing. Traditional water filtration systems, they don't really work that well for removing 1-value-4-dioxane. So the best way to address it is to try and stop it from getting into the water in the first place.
So we need to go upstream, figure out where it's coming from. If we can identify the source, then maybe we can manage it better.
Exactly. And in this case, there's a prime suspect. Asheboro's Great Oak Landfill.
Ah, landfills. Not exactly known for being environmentally friendly.
Well, yeah,
right?
yeah. It's not always as simple as just pointing fingers at landfills. It's often the industries and the municipalities that are using them.
Yeah.
They're the real issue. It's about what they're dumping, where it's coming from,
Yeah.
and what can be done to treat it properly. Or, even better, prevent it from even getting to the landfill.
Yeah, it's about getting to the root of the problem, understanding the whole system.
Yeah,
I have a feeling this is where it gets really complicated.
it does get complicated.
Yeah.
But that complexity is also where the solutions are.
Well, it sounds like we've got a lot more to unpack here. This is a multifaceted issue. Potential health risks, regulatory challenges, and it sounds like we need a really systemic approach to find solutions. So this is going to be a really interesting deep dive for our listeners. So we've got this landfill as a potential source, but you said it's not as simple as just blaming landfills in general.
Right. It's about looking at what's actually being dumped there.
Yeah, so what specific materials should we be looking at?
Well, the 1,4-dioxane that's ending up in the landfill and then the water, it's often a byproduct of manufacturing. Industries that use certain solvents, like you'll find it in industries that make plastics, resins, other industrial chemicals.
So it's not JST heavy industry then?
Right, and it can even be in some consumer products, like detergents and shampoos,
Yeah.
but in much smaller quantities.
So it's in stuff we use every day that makes it even harder to track and manage.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer of complexity.
So if we can't just filter it out, what are our options?
Well, prevention is key. Looking at how industries are handling their waste. Are they treating the 1,4-dioxane properly before it gets discharged? Are there leaks or spills happening during manufacturing?
So stricter regulations and better monitoring would help.
Definitely.
But you mentioned earlier some innovative treatment methods. What are those?
There's some exciting new technologies, like advanced oxidation processes that use things like ozone or UV light to break down the 1,4-dioxane into less harmful substances.
Oh, that's cool. But I imagine implementing these new technologies could be a challenge, right?
Yeah, especially for smaller companies that might not have the resources.
Right. If it's too expensive, they might try to cut corners.
Exactly.
So we need to find a balance, though, between regulating A&D, supporting these new technologies.
Right. It's not about punishing industries. It's about working together to find solutions that work for everyone.
Okay, so we've talked about industry, but what about us? What can individuals do to help with this issue?
It can feel overwhelming, I know, but individual actions do matter. One of the most important things is to stay informed, raise awareness, talk to people about it, share articles, contact your elected officials.
Make our voices heard.
Exactly. And,
Yeah.
supporting organizations
Yeah.
that are working to protect water resources. That can make a big difference.
Yeah, so getting involved locally,
That's right.
making our voices heard at higher levels.
And, you can also make choices as a consumer. Like look for products that are labeled as 1,4-dioxane free.
Vote with our wallets. So individual actions, collective efforts, policy changes, technological solutions. Is there anything else we should be thinking about when it comes to addressing this?
Well, one thing we haven't really touched on is environmental justice.
Oh, that's a good point.
Because,
Yeah.
pollution doesn't affect everyone equally.
Right.
Low-income communities, communities of color, they're often the ones who are hit the hardest by these kinds of problems.
So finding solutions to this 1,4-dioxane issue, we have to make sure those solutions are equitable.
Absolutely. Environmental justice needs to be a top priority.
This conversation is showing how connected all these issues really are. Water quality, industrial practices, regulations, consumer choices, social justice. It's complex, but it shows how even small actions can have a ripple effect.
It's all connected,
Yes, yeah.
and it can feel overwhelming. But we all have a role to play.
And this is why I think these deep dives are so important. We take these complex issues, break them down, look at them from different angles, so our listeners can make informed decisions.
Exactly. It's about going beyond the headlines.
And you mentioned earlier that 1,004-dioxane, it's just one of many emerging contaminants that we're finding in our water. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, as our technology gets better, we're finding more and more chemicals that we didn't even know were there before. Pharmaceuticals, pesticides, personal care products, they're all ending up in our water.
And we don't even know the long-term health effects of a lot of these.
That's the scary part. We're only just starting to understand the impacts of these exposures.
It makes you wonder what else is out there that we haven't even discovered yet.
Right. And that leads to a bigger question. How do we shift from a reactive approach to a proactive one?
Instead of waiting for a problem to happen.
Exactly. How can we design our systems to prevent these contaminants from getting into the water in the first place?
That's a big question.
It is.
But it's also hopeful. If we start thinking that way, we can create a truly sustainable future for our water.
I agree. It's about moving towards a circular economy where we minimize waste, reuse resources, and design products with the whole life cycle in mind.
This has been a really insightful discussion. We've gone from a local news story to talking about the future of water. So I think this is a good place to wrap up part 2 of this deep dive. Okay, so before we wrap up completely, I want to circle back to that legal battle we were talking about earlier. Between DEQ and the city of Asheboro, what's the latest on that?
Well, as of today, things are still kind of up in the air. The DEQ is under a lot of pressure from the EPA and from the communities affected by this pollution.
Yeah, so they're kind of stuck in the middle. They want to protect the river, but they also don't want to put too much pressure on businesses.
Right, it's a balancing act.
So how do they even enforce something like this? Are they constantly testing the water?
It's a combination of things. Monitoring and testing are definitely important, but it also involves working with industries to come up with best practices to minimize the amount of 1-DiO4-dioxane that's even being released.
So it's not just about catching them after they pollute, it's about preventing it in the first place.
Yeah.
This situation with the 1-4-dioxane, it feels like a microcosm of all the challenges we face when it comes to the environment. It's complex. There are a lot of different people involved.
Yeah, and the solutions aren't always easy.
It really highlights the need for good science and strong regulations.
Absolutely.
But it also shows the power of people speaking up.
Yeah, the communities along the Cape Fear River, they've really brought attention to this issue, and they've been pushing for action.
Along with groups like the Southern Environmental Law Center, it's inspiring to see people coming together like that.
You played a crucial role.
So it's a good reminder that we all have a responsibility to advocate for a healthy environment, even if it feels like our actions are small.
Every little bit helps. Stay informed. Make good choices about what you buy. Support organizations that are fighting for clean water, and let your elected officials know that this is important to you.
Create a culture of responsibility and demand better from our industries, our government, and ourselves.
We can all be part of the solution.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. We've gone from a local news story about a chemical spill to a much bigger conversation about the future of water.
And I hope it leaves you feeling empowered.
The future of our water is in our hands.
Every choice we make makes a difference.
Thank you for joining us on this journey. We'll be back soon with another deep dive. Until then, stay curious, stay engaged, and keep diving deeper.